Now it's time for the Real News Radio. Here's Farron.
Hello and welcome to the Real News, your weekly call-in broadcast where we discuss current events and the news of the week that went unreported by our corporate-owned media. Today we have a special edition, a look at the history of false flag events. And a false flag event is that when a government fakes attacks to advance their goals of war. We will go into this shortly, and we will have today an extended time to take calls also. But first, I want to report on the Mexican troops cross the U.S. border and hold an agent. Reuters News Agency reported this week that Mexican soldiers briefly held a U.S. Border Patrol agent at gunpoint in a remote stretch of the Arizona desert after they mistakenly strayed north across the border, authorities said on Wednesday. Tucson Sector Border Patrol spokesman Mike Scalia said 4 Mexican soldiers wearing desert camouflage and carrying weapons confronted the agent early on Sunday morning as he patrolled a border road in Tonawanda Nation southwest of Tucson. Scalia said the agent repeatedly identified himself in English and Spanish. After 4 or 5 minutes, the soldiers lowered their weapons and crossed back into the Mexico on foot. Our understanding is that the encounter stemmed from a momentary misunderstanding as to the exact location of the U.S.-Mexican border. We recognize that occasional incidents such as these can and do occur, but we take the misunderstanding seriously, and so does the government of Mexico. I would like to say that they cross where the border is just a piddly little barbed wire fence. So they always say it was a misunderstanding, unsure where the line is. A country without a border is borderless. With the billions upon billions squandered in Washington, could we not have a secure border? But no, that wouldn't decimate our middle class. That wouldn't undermine our society. It is an act of treason for our government to be so willingly incompetent as not to secure our border and get rid of the ludicrous legislation like the anchor baby policy. It's about time everybody stand up and demand action, or sit down and expect to see more of this military invasion along our southern border. I also would like to update the anthrax case. This story got more bizarre by the day this past week, and I actually received a couple of emails criticizing me for questioning the government's version last week, and I hope anyone that's kept up with the news would see that perhaps I had some foresight in what would be coming in the coming week. The allegations about the anthrax suspect and his incarceration with mental health professionals raises several questions. Why would a top bioterror expert go to a fresh out of school sociologist, a group addiction counselor, as opposed to an experienced psychiatric or psychologist? Why would he talk about homicidal tendencies in a group counseling session as opposed to a private session? How could someone committed to a mental institution on the basis that he was likely a mass murderer and a danger to himself and others simply sign himself out of a mental institution? Why was the newly certified group addiction counselor, who herself has a history of battery, drugs, DUIs, and bankruptcies, fully briefed on one of the most sensitive criminal investigations in history? If he really did confess to homicidal tendencies, why would mental health professionals wait 8 days after he signed himself out of a psych ward before obtaining a restraining order against him or recommitting him to the psych hospital? This guy was a top bioweapons expert and supposedly a homicidal maniac, so he could easily murder the group counselor and others. Would a biochemist, a scientist of toxic materials, kill himself with a concoction that takes 2 days to die in agonizing pain? He passed 2 polygraph tests. His DNA and fingerprints did not match that on the letters. Daschle was on the morning shows admitting that this story does not add up. His co-workers went on TV claiming they don't think he done it. His family is in total disbelief. He played the organ at the local church. Case closed. The Lee Harvey Oswald of the anthrax case commits suicide, and the case is closed. Today we're changing our format. We purposely didn't schedule a guest today. We wanted to discuss some of the alarming facts in our history and also some other governments' history also. False flag events where governments deliberately deceive their citizens. We will have time today to take more phone calls. Last week we had so many phone calls after the Barr interview that we didn't really get to do the news, but that's great. The public you, the listener, is being given the opportunity to be heard here on WSIC 1400 and WDSL 1520. This broadcast is going from Hickory to deep into Winston, from Yadkinville to Salisbury. So again, this is a forum for the opinions and for the truth. Today, I can just about guarantee you that you will hear facts that can easily be proven, that is admitted, and has been erased from history and the past. Although now, in recent years, because of the Freedom of Information Act and the fact that some of these events were decades ago, the History Channel now documents much of what we will report. Today, for the sake of time, we can only report some, by all means not all, that has happened. And after the first break around 11:20, we will go to the phones, and anyone that has knowledge of these events, feel free to share it. And as always, if you disagree, your opinion is welcome. But this is a discussion of facts, so let's keep it to that. So, Brian, go ahead, get us started. Where would you like to begin today?
Well, again, Farron, as you just mentioned, there's so many examples of false flags throughout the history of the world. I mean, there's literally thousands, and we can only cover a few here today. So I wanted to go ahead back through history chronologically and start at perhaps one of the most famous instances of false flag in the history of the world, and that was on the night of July 19th, 64 A.D. A great fire would engulf Rome and burn uncontrolled for 5 days. Although it is unlikely that Roman Emperor Nero was directly responsible for starting the fire deliberately, he would utilize the opportunity to seek revenge on his enemy, the Christians. Nero's administration realized the need to employ False Flag 101. When anything bad happens to you, even if it's accidental, point the finger at your enemy. Even more likely for Nero were the two biggest Christian leaders, Peter and Paul, just happened to be in Rome at that moment. Nero spread word that the Christians had started the Great Fire. The citizens of Rome bought this hook, line, and sinker. Peter was crucified and Paul beheaded. Hundreds of others were fed to the lions or smeared with tar and set on fire.
I was given a book by Al, one of our sponsors, that chronicles the martyrdom of the Christians. I can't remember the exact title of it. I'd heard of it before, but this began some of the most atrocious treatment of the Christians in Rome, and I strongly recommend anyone that's a churchgoer and a Christian to read that book. It's very interesting reading.
Moving forward in history, the Guy Fawkes incident on November 5th, 1605, Guy Fawkes was framed for the attempted bombing of the British Parliament. This was then utilized as a pretext for war with Spain.
What was the movie that they just did that in?
V for Vendetta.
Yeah, V for Vendetta. Yeah, that was good.
Remember the 5th of November.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that was good. I watched the movie and didn't know it was based on Guy Fawkes. I did not know this story, but then I looked into it and it's an amazing story. It's an amazing story. It goes, I guess it's not in the history books. I never learned about it in school, but it's very interesting.
Absolutely. And again, moving forward, the USS Maine exploded in Havana Harbor on February 15th, 1898, killing 266 crew members. 8 more would die later from injuries. The event was used to build a news media propaganda force, catapulting the U.S. into the Spanish-American War. The phrase, "Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain," was echoed throughout the country's newspapers and culture to rally the masses. Following the war, the U.S. had gained control of Cuba, the Philippines, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Hawaiian Islands.
Now, this is kind of where it begins for me. Most people,